Good evening again, everyone, and welcome to the Association for Black Empowerment's program on Black tax. Today, that's what we're here to discuss. And if you've ever had that understanding that you've been treated differently for no other reason than the color of your skin, you might have experienced the Black tax. This evening, we'll explore the origin, and it could come as a surprise to a lot of us. We'll talk tonight about its impact and explore possible ways to navigate Black tax. Tonight, we're fortunate to have a panel of great guests here to explore this issue, and I'll introduce them right now. Number one is Mrs. Latrina Caldwell, who is a mental health professional and a serial entrepreneur. Mr. Joshua Franklin, who is an attorney and a professional mentor in development training for aspiring entrepreneurs, startup business people, students, and young professionals. Also, Dr. James Holmes Jr., who is a published author and principal owner of Black Lion Companies and Think Tank. Mr. Shakur Jukes, the founder and owner of Jukes CPA LLC. And last but certainly not least, Dr. James Thompson, who is board certified, I should say, in immunology and is an expert on COVID-19 vaccines. And Dr. Thompson also has created a short video to open tonight's conversation regarding Black tax. Without further ado, we want to say welcome to all five of our panelists this evening. And if our team is ready to go, let's roll that video from Dr. Thompson.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome, sir.
I've been charged with the welcome task of orienting you to the Black tax. Over the next few minutes, there we go. Over the next few minutes, I will discuss what the Black tax is, its origin, and how it relates to personal and public health. If you were to go online to look up the definition of the Black tax, you would most likely see it described as the financial burden experienced by Black people who have achieved a higher level of success, but feel obligated to support family members that are less financially secure. It's been difficult to determine who was the first to use the term Black tax, but it is apparent after exploring references online that someone in South Africa deserves the credit. Since apartheid ended in 1994, some young Black South Africans, through education and parental support, have been able to escape poverty and become gainfully employed. These individuals quickly find themselves constrained by the pressures of financially supporting their parents and other family members. It's not uncommon for graduates who secure good-paying jobs to be sending half or more of their salary home to members of the family that are not doing as well. The term Black tax symbolizes the extra financial burden they carry, resulting in the failure for them to eventually achieve independent wealth. In South Africa, the segregation, inequality of schools, poor access to health care and healthy food, and high jobless rates continues to turn the wheels of poverty, much like here in America. But the emphasis of the Black tax burden in South Africa comes from strong cultural and traditional influences and the role of the firstborn, who often bears and accepts the responsibility of taking care of the parents and siblings who cannot take care of themselves. The accompanying stress can be overwhelming and greatly impact their physical and mental state. For South Africans, it was 46 years of apartheid and the horrors associated with it. For African Americans, it was 246 years of slavery, followed by decades of Jim Crow, lynchings, continued segregation, and and discrimination. In the US, although the constraints of family obligations are similar to the experiences in South Africa, which I can personally ascribe to, there is yet a broader tapestry of issues that defines our Black tax. First, historically, there was 100% tax on the labor of our enslaved ancestors. They had no income, no savings or pension plans. And how do you put a cost on the beatings, the rape, the separation of entire families, and experimentation on slave women by some doctors? The Black tax assigns a cost to some of these horrible past examples of abuse and discrimination, a cost that significantly influences our present day struggles. Sean Rochester is the author of the book, The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America. He comprehensively explores these concepts. Most of what I've said and what I'm going to finish up saying, I learned from his book. Now, the Reconstruction era followed the end of slavery, but was short-lived because of the antics of the president who followed Lincoln, President Andrew Johnson, and the emergence of Jim Crow. After slavery was abolished, more than 70 years of sharecropping followed, which was another form of 100% tax on labor. Let me explain how. Newly freed slaves had no jobs waiting for them. They had no assets, no public schools, no public shelters. They pretty much just had the clothing on their backs. Plantation owners saw an opportunity to acquire cheap labor. So they allowed former slaves to stay on the land and share the crops they produced as their income and for the profit of the owners. The problem was it created a cycle of poverty because the best the sharecroppers could do was break even, but many went into debt. The plantation owners provided the land, the equipment, and the seed, but the sharecroppers had to pay for some of their food, pay for their clothing, and personal supplies. You see, the plantation owners often owned the grocery stores, the clothing stores, and supply stores. Since crops were seasonal, but sharecroppers had some daily needs for food and personal supplies, they would have to buy on credit. Now, at harvest time, the owners would decide on the value of their crops that the owners would then take to the markets. See where this is going? Debts would have to be paid at harvest time, often leaving sharecroppers with little residual money or still in debt. When schools were in the vicinity, they were for whites only. And when Black schools began to pop up, they were poorly staffed and grossly undersupplied. This cycle of poverty is emblematic of what's going on today. Blacks mostly have service jobs. Money flows out of our community to white-owned businesses and franchises, or some businesses owned by other ethnic groups. We often get drowned in debt by buying on credit or overusing credit cards. And the cycle is perpetuated because of poor quality schools, a paucity of quality teachers, and limited gainful employment. In some ways, from a nutrition standpoint, we are worse off today because of the quality of food we consume compared to a couple of generations ago. Speaking of food, our health is largely dependent on what we eat. Lack of access to healthy food and lack of awareness about healthy food negatively impacts our lifespan and health span. What's a health span? Our health span represents how many years of life we enjoy good health, not being on a list of medications or having to see doctors every week or go through procedures. Fast food and most restaurant foods are filled with drivers that cause chronic disease in many Americans, but especially in Blacks. Salt, oil, and sugar, the SOS markers, are the main culprits and the main ingredients of highly processed foods. As we consume highly processed foods, we hasten our arrival to events that include heart attacks, strokes, the development of diabetes, the diagnosis of cancer, dementia, chronic kidney disease, and some mental health disorders. Now, you might be thinking, what has this got to do with the black tax? Everything. In the US, the black tax is the extra burden Blacks feel from the long history of systemic racism. It's something many of us, not all of us, but many of us experience every day of our lives. When we go to work, or we go out to find work, or go to school before we get frustrated and decide to drop out of school. When we walk around our unsafe neighborhoods, or go out to eat, or to our neighborhood market that grossly overcharges us. As long as we have underfunded schools, underfunded parks and transportation systems, poor job opportunities, violence in our streets, and limited access to healthcare and quality food, we will continue to struggle. These are the social determinants of health. The black tax is not an excuse or an attempt to blame someone or an entity. It is a framework to understand the how and the why, so we can be better prepared to come up with rational solutions. The social determinants of health not only reflect on our physical and mental welfare, but also our economic welfare. But if we are not physically and mentally fit, we will not have long and productive lives. They will be short and unproductive. We'll become distracted by just trying to survive, and often share that burden with our loved ones. Another example of the black tax. Can you see now the circular connection here between systemic racism, poor health, job inequality, and lack of wealth? I sure hope so. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Thompson, I have to tell you that when we started this conference this evening, this discussion, I was feeling really good. And I'll keep my personal feelings out of this, but you really paint an interesting picture. I'd not heard of the black tax, but we certainly have experienced it, and as you've outlined, in several areas of our life. And I'd like to turn to our panels right now, our panel, I should say. And I'm curious, Latrina Caldwell, and I'll try to space out these questions. We don't have a lot of time this evening, but as a mental health professional and a serial entrepreneur, you're really engaged in several different ways with black tax. How does, from your perspective, how does the black tax affect your particular career field?
Well, I work with families, with youth and family services. You know, I go out in the community, and of course they're affected by black tax with just the household dynamics these days, even more in 2023. They're not able to gain structure and to have a foundation because of all the weight that they have to carry on a daily basis. And that's what I see in most of my clients, just to work 3-4 jobs just to try to get somewhere, but you continuously get knocked down when you're working as hard as you can work. I see it also often, and I just try my best to motivate and encourage them to stay focused on their goals and to believe and know who they are and keeping a faith foundation, because we have to keep going. In spite of, we have to speak up, and platforms like this gives us the opportunity to speak up about the black tax and try to make some changes. It's going to take all of our voices together as a collaborative effort for things to change. So, all
of our voices together. And Joshua Franklin, you're an attorney, a professional mentor. Tell us how it shows up in your life with the many people that I know that you see in your profession.
Absolutely. I think one of the main ways that Black tax comes about in my experience, certainly practicing law, is coming across the many different families, particularly families of color that have a lot more social issues that are intertwined into their finances than others. And certainly within the realm of mentorship, whether it be mentoring high school students all the way even up to postgraduate college students and some early professionals, you kind of are able to more clearly recognize both the financial and the educational gap that are experienced from some of the social settings as well as some of the experiences. And so oftentimes that's how I recognize the burden that Black tax has caused on the community is in essentially the way we have experiences day to day.
Very interesting. And James Holmes, I saw you, I was just watching your facial expressions as Dr. Thompson was unrolling and unfolding, I should say, the details of Black tax. I'm just wondering, in your field, how have you personally experienced it? You're an author, you the owner of the Black Lion Companies and think tank. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge an outstanding presentation. And I've also gone through Sean Rochester's book, which is outstanding material. And one of the things that Mr. Rochester emphasizes is that collectively, we are missing an aggregate of about 6 million jobs. So does that affect me? Yes, it's affected me. It's affected me in my past job searches. It's affected family members in their job searches. And actually, total, it's about $8 trillion. $8 trillion. Grasp that for a moment, which in essence is the driver of all socioeconomic disparities. So just like our parents taught us when we were younger, we have to do more, we have to work harder, and we have to be more excellent.
All right. And thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And Mr. Jukes, you're an owner and you're a CPA. Outlined very early in the presentation, Dr. Thompson talked about the financial impact. Tell us about what you've seen and how have you been able to counter at least a portion of the Black tax?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. When we talk about the Black tax, I think about like the effects of it. And so myself being a accountant, CPA, and tax professional, thinking about how it impacts our communities from a tax standpoint. And one thing I think about is home ownership and how home ownership in America is very shaped by race. When we think about the majority of white people own homes and whether the majority of Black Americans are renters. And we don't allow a tax break for renting, but we allow a tax break for home ownership. And so thinking about those trickle down effects and, why societal research, shows that going back decades, that white and Blacks live in different neighborhoods as well, too. And that the neighborhoods that most white folks live in appreciate and value, whereas the Black ones don't appreciate and value. And so therefore, when we go to sell our homes, there are tax breaks for appreciation in homes. And while Black Americans, when we sell our homes, we're selling them at a loss that are not deductible. And so thinking about how it plays into the tax standpoint, when I'm engaging with my clients, I'm trying to help educate them on the benefits that are able to them by, owning homes versus renting, or various businesses and various different deductions. And so I think all that plays and the foundation comes from the Black tax impact on our communities.
Thank you very much. And I want to go back to Dr. Thompson, who shared this video with us. You're an immunologist. I've spoken with Dr. Fauci one-on-one. I've talked with the epidemiologist, Dr. Michael Osterholm. And I'm just curious, you mentioned the health impacts of the Black tax. Are there some positives that have come out of the COVID-19 that can really start to get people of color a leg up on Black tax, especially with respect to health concerns?
Well, in a way, unfortunately, the pandemic impacted people of color, and particularly African Americans, disproportionately than other ethnic groups. And that hits on some of the things I was mentioning in terms of our health disposition, which is still tied into also our economic disposition. So all of these things are intertwined. But one thing the pandemic did is it's like took a scab off a wound, because these problems with there being increased blood pressure problems and diabetes and kidney disease and problems with high cholesterol. These are things that are prevalent in the Black community, disproportionate to everyone else. And a lot of it has to do with lifestyle and diet. So if you can bring up a positivity to this Black tax construct, well, it identifies and it gives us some mechanisms. And as I mentioned, if we understand more of the problem, then that helps us with trying to define what the solutions are going to be, because it's not going to be a one button or one thing. It's just too complex for that. And one thing I like about what Sean Rochester had in his book is he addressed some of those things. You know, you look at it from an individual level as well as from a helicopter view from a community or a broader level, in terms of investing in ourselves, in terms of the hiring that we do, in terms of depositing in banks that are owned or run by people of color. So I think it's brought more attention to this, and that brings us to this venue we have here. So yes, there's a positivity to that, but we need to keep developing this process.
Developing the process is certainly important. And I know Latrina Caldwell, as a serial entrepreneur, it seems as if you found some ways to navigate, if not around it, through Black tax. Tell us about your experience as an entrepreneur.
Oh, it's been a journey. It has definitely been a journey. Now, even as a city commissioner, I just ran for office and for city council. It was a journey being a Black woman and my experiences that I encountered, the same with my career. It has been harder. I have had to work harder, extremely hard. At one point, I had 5 little jobs, just to support my business, because it was harder for me to gain the visibility that I need and to make the connections that I need. But the key thing that has guided me through is my faith base and really a clear understanding of who I am, whose I am, and where I'm going in my life. So that has been very helpful. And even to acknowledge when there's failures, when I make mistakes and things like that, and just knowing what I'm up against. I already know, being a Black woman, that I have to fight and go harder. So it's already embedded in me. But it's definitely been a journey. I wouldn't trade it, because each one reached one. And I reach back to get others to kind of pave the way for them so they don't have to fight as hard as I had to fight. So definitely a journey I'm still, on. So.
Latrina's talking about that journey, and each one teach one. And Joshua Franklin, you're a mentor. What is if there is a theme that you share with the young people that you mentor, what is that positive theme that you try to leave with these young folks to help them to break through the Black tax?
For young people particularly, it's a sense of empowerment and future forward thinking. I think for many people, the idea of working out of the Black tax seems so far and beyond their imagination that they're unable to fathom the idea of getting beyond that. And so offering them that level of inspiration and in putting them in settings like these to get them that knowledge and information, and to provide them with the community of professionals helpful mentors, educators, etc., to take on that each one reach one, each one teach one mindset, but also to instill that it takes a village and to show them what that village can create together. So for me, it's oftentimes exposure as well as extreme inspiration as to the powers that can be in the future.
I'll come back to each of our panelists on this next question. As you just outlined, Joshua, and I'll start with you again just to pick up on that thought. Is there a right age that you start telling your Black contemporaries and the young people about how to break through?
Truly and honestly, I say as early as sixth grade. And for some even earlier, I recognize that our community does truly develop so much faster than others. And because of the Black tax, we often experience adult things at such a younger age as well, that not harboring the idea of what adulthood is, of what financial education is, of what responsibility is, and placing our young people in a position to make those decisions and be aware as early as sixth grade, certainly if not sixth grade, no later than the beginning of high school is truly when we should start instilling those opportunities as well as those fundamentals within our community.
I'm being told that it's really important that we need to make sure that we're reaching back. And thank you for that, Mr. Frank. And as we go to Mr. Holmes, James Holmes Jr., in your think tank, is there an age that's too young? Do you agree with what Joshua was mentioning? I'd heard that if you don't reach a child, especially a Black male child, by the age of 5 years old, you've lost them.
Well, good point. Very good point. First of all, I guess, well, we all understand, as Frederick Douglass once said, that it's much easier to train a child than to repair a broken man. So we want to start early. My studies show that by the age of 7, that much of our opinions regarding finances and things like that are determined in childhood. So obviously, the sooner we can catch them, the better. I do address that with some of the children's financial literacy books that I write. So that is critical. Currently, Blacks own 2% of the wealth in the United States. So we're obviously lagging behind. We have some catching up to do. So many of these things tie in together. And one thing that we don't want to lose track of is we don't want to view this as being insurmountable, because actually, and even a quote from Sean Rochester himself is that we're all walking miracles. We are all walking miracles. We need to know that. We need to understand that. And we all need to pull each other up. I would encourage everyone to get involved with whatever organization or cause that they see that is doing positive things and to help contribute and make a difference, because the old adage, you can teach someone to fish, you can give someone a fish or you can teach them to fish. So no one's going to save us but us.
All right. Shakur, you're the founder of Jukes CPA. We talked about finance, and I'm just curious, in the lens of the pandemic, I'm just really curious with you, what have you seen? Have you seen any changes in social media in this era of the pandemic and the awareness of the Black tax? Have you seen a change in the narrative?
Yeah, I think especially with social media, information has become much more readily available. People are sharing content and in bite-sized pieces where you get very informed in small pieces, but it'll allow us to share that knowledge amongst a vast majority instead of one individual who have the recipe, the solution to navigating through this Black tax. We're able to share our experiences, understand that we're not going through this alone. And so with social media, with COVID, it allowed people to recalibrate at home. It did cause some financial stresses and trauma, but it also allowed us to, become more together as well too. Unite the family. It allowed people to reevaluate financial status, or even this was an opportunity for a lot of people for financial gain. If you had the opportunity, when you think about there's a mass exodus of people leaving a city, going back home, and so those type of opportunities were available to us throughout the pandemic. But I think the key part is that knowledge piece, just that our ability to get things in real time. And when we think about each one, teach one, there's no excuse for us not to be able to give back to someone and share the knowledge. We have so many resources available to us with our phones at the power of our hands. We can easily send someone a text or a message. And so those type of things, I think, will allow us to navigate through this Black tax. And I think that's what have been very beneficial.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. And you're at the helm of all this. You set the stage so aptly this evening. And I was just mentioning about social media, the changes. And I just read just today that social media is the new reality show. And when you think about reality television, a lot of that is not based in fact. What do you think about the impact of social media? Is it real that we're seeing, or is this just a facade for something that really has a deeper meaning that all of us should really take a good look at?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, that's the answer is it depends. I think there's more potential to gain from social media than to lose. But of course, from looking through my lens as a health professional and someone that spent a lot of time talking with people about vaccines and COVID, that that in order to really utilize it where you get a positive outcome, we have to make sure we are up to speed with some of these social media platforms. I have people in my age group, I'm in my 60s, that, just don't even know what to do with TikTok, right? But a lot of people are spending time on these venues. And so I'm trying to adapt my old brain to navigating through some of these things, because it's important, because that's got the attention of a lot of people. And the downside is when people get misinformation and disinformation. And we saw a lot of that about vaccines and about COVID. That's a whole nother discussion. But it's vital to understand that it's here and we need to try to be a part of it. Those of us that are in positions maybe to contribute and add content. So I think it is important. I belong to a foundation, a 501(c)(3) foundation, as does Deborah Hurston, and we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years trying to address some of these issues. And there was some talk about the financial investing and doing what we can to teach people. Well, the social media, the internet, the programs like this do allow us to have a broader outreach. And if we want to really get the attention of some of these young people, then we do need to put that in our toolbox as a means of communication, and especially to address some of the things that run against science, or run against the thinking of what's rational. So I'm a fan of it. I think we're all tied up into it. Most people, no matter what their socioeconomic levels, have smartphones now. And so we have to be smart about how we utilize this technology.
I want to throw another question right back at you, Doctor, and then I'll go back around to our panel. So you've talked about the many aspects of the Black tax. Where do you see the tax having the highest toll on our communities right now? And is that an area where we need to really focus our attention in order to get a hold of the systemic racism?
Yeah, you have wonderful questions. I see the greatest area of concern I see is in what Sean Rochester, the term he used was human capital development. That's a fancy term for education. We have to fortify, support, do everything we can to increase the quality of education and educators. Now, of course, as a person that's involved with health, I also see it's equally important to make sure we get all the information and education we can about how to preserve health. Right now, conventional thinking with conventionally trained doctors is you treat diseases as they come,
Right.
but we've got to get to the root cause. And so it's still, everything reverts back to education. And education starts at an early age. So that brings into it children, brings into it some of the things we were talking about already with social media, because children are getting involved with social media at 5 and 6 years of age now. So I would have to say, in answer to your question, it's the education. When I started off saying about the Black tax in South Africa and people being able to rise above the poverty, it was the people that had been able to get a good education and had good family support.
Latrina Caldwell, do you agree with that? You're a mental health professional and a serial entrepreneur. Dr. Thompson just said that education is an area that's having the highest tolls in our community. Do you agree or disagree? If you disagree, where is it?
I agree. I'm sorry I couldn't find a mute, but I agree. I agree with everything he stated.
How do we combat it? Where do we start? And with whom do we start?
It starts at home. I believe everything starts right at home. And I do believe that we should start at younger than, I wanted to say 12 years old, but it should be a little younger than that. My niece was reading at 4 years old, and it blew me away. I couldn't believe it. I used to spell things and think that she couldn't understand, and she would say the words. So we should start at an early age at home with laying the foundation for their life so they can know what they're going to face in this world.
Interesting. Dr. Thompson really outlined for us the many areas of the Black tax. So in your opinion, Joshua, do you think that this is more generational, or because of social media today that is impacting us at every point, at every aspect of it at the same time? Or is it impacting younger people more, or is it impacting, Dr. Thompson mentioned that he's in his 60s, or is it impacting our older communities more?
I think the impact is a bit trifold, and to explain a little deeper, I think that the social media has certainly kind of widespread our dissemination of information amongst young people. And I liked what you said about kind of it becoming sort of like a reality TV show, which is not all entirely reality or real life, but it does oftentimes create a picture of what reality should be. And I think with respect to social media and the way information is now being disseminated at such a fast pace, both information and misinformation, it's causing the older generation to become a bit more critical of that. And it's causing also the younger generation to have a larger imagination of the possibilities. Now, I don't necessarily take a position on whether those things are positive or negative, but it should be noted that for the younger generation, it is so much more important now to be critically thinking about the information that you're receiving, whether it be something as simple as waking up and checking the news or the weather, or something as serious as determining, which type of entity structure you'd be filing, or what kind of house you should be looking for, even what opportunities are exposed to you. So to answer that question in short, I think for the younger generation, it's becoming a lot harder to determine what's real and what's not. And for the older generation, it's becoming a lot more frustrating to understand what is new, because there's such a blurred line between fact and opinion now.
So thank you for that, Mr. Franklin. So James, the reality is that shootings are happening with our young people. We're seeing mass shootings. We're seeing shootings in our own community. Is that, in your opinion, a direct result of the Black tax? Is that what's your perspective of that?
Absolutely, it is. Violence is. Nearly all dysfunctional and derogatory behavior is involved with it because it is a key driver, as I mentioned earlier.
How do we help our children with it?
Say that once again, Freddie.
How do we help our children deal with it?
Well, the key is knowledge. Knowledge and discernment equals wisdom. So we're going to have to, as I write in my books, present them with the gift of knowledge. And then that will carry them so that they're not so easily controlled by just all the misinformation out there on social media and in society in general. If you are ignorant, then nonsense makes perfect sense. So we want to start young with them to arm them with necessary information so that they'll have better choices, which will lead to better decisions. And overall, Freddie, once we get started, and this is a good start, it can and will have a positive exponential effect.
I was going to say Dr. Jukes. Mr. Jukes, from your perspective, where are we and how do we take care of our children with regard to this? And how do we bring them up to shield them, if anything, if not push them through the Black tax issue?
Yeah, and I think it's been one of the kind of common things so far as, knowledge and literacy, education. How do we educate our youth at an early age? And I think about education and how it impacts, we talked about misinformation and how that misinformation from a finance standpoint leads to financial trauma. And we think about financial trauma, that's triggered by inaccurate guidance, advice leading to loss of savings, over leveraging debt. But if we can educate our youth as early as possible on how, money management, April is financial literacy month. And so you think about, how do we apply these practices that we learn later in our years at an earlier age, practice those things with our children and how it can set them up for true generational wealth and success. And it reduces that trauma that is brought by financial burden. And, the way when we keep hearing financial trauma, it's connected to how we think and how we feel about money, what we do with our money as well, too. And so if we can find a way to combat that trauma, it will allow us to be much more encouraged about financial systems that impact our long-term success, whether that's investing, home ownership, banking relationships, estate planning, all those things, the foundation starts with that knowledge. And if we can start at an earlier age, the better we are in the long run.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Jukes. And Dr. Thompson, before we take, I like to call it the seventh inning stretch in our conversation tonight. Can you briefly speak before we take a quick break about the stress, the microaggressions? We've heard families breaking up because of financial concerns brought on by institutional racism. How do we break through with that? How do we deal with the stress of Black tax?
Yes, another great question. And it's something that we definitely should think about and address. And it begins with something that is kind of a reverberating theme here with education, with having people learn about the different types of stress first, because there's some stress we have that's identifiable and that can be managed and can be either eliminated or reduced. And then there's other types of stress we can't do anything about, like perhaps the stress of what's going on around the world, or with some political issues that are going on. Of course, some of these we can do, like become more active voters and make sure that we're involved in the processes locally, state, and federal, and making sure we maintain our voting rights, of course. But we need to identify personally what stressors we can reduce or eliminate. For me, it's not saying yes to everything that people want me to go or do. And, from a financial standpoint, it may be if you're living the life like in South Africa, where maybe you've achieved a certain financial level of success and everybody's got their hand out, right? Setting boundaries. That's important, to set boundaries. And when you do these things and you try to become more organized and you make sure that you've tapped into those health initiatives, regular exercise, eating healthy, you know, doing things that allows your body to handle stress that you cannot change right away or that you don't have control over. Getting proper sleep. Adults need 7 hours sleep, quality sleep. I average 6. I'm still working on it. But there are things we need to boxes we need to check so that the stress doesn't just take over us. And a lot of times we self-sabotage because we don't get enough sleep. We take on too much. We sometimes take things too much to heart. When if we meditate and find out other outlets, some spiritual connectivity, we can handle these things better.
All right. Well, I was going to take the fifth because I have a morning show and I'm in the studio by 3 a.m., but I guess I don't get a pass with that. In our conversation today and the feedback that ABEP has received when asking the community about Black tax, because none of the younger individuals understood what it is. And I'm just so happy that Dr. Thompson laid it out for us this evening. So I want to go first with Ms. Caldwell. How do we go about, and we've heard the theme education quite a bit this evening, how do we go about educating our younger generation regarding Black tax?
Well, I have for instance, a youth mentoring program.
Mm-hmm.
12 to 18-year-old girls and boys. And it's called Future Leaders Matter because they're the future. And I do believe as a therapist, as a mental health professional, I've identified that the households need help, right? They need help restoring the family structures. So at home, again, it starts at home, and then tapping into those resources that are available for your family, for the children, and really tapping in and learning from those experiences and then taking off with that. I truly believe that's the start. And these conversations right here for us to go back home and tell and spread the word that we need to start talking to our youth younger. We need to do more restoring in our households for our families for the future.
So it starts at home. Joshua Franklin, do you sign on to that? But how do we start with our children? How do we start the educational process?
Absolutely. I certainly do agree that it starts at home, and to the extent that we can also extend that outside of our homes into our closer communities and into any communities that we are engaging with children or other people that are our age, constantly disseminating information to one another, whether it be for our own personal benefit, for their personal benefit, or even for the benefit of a third party.
Mr. Holmes, some of the parents were afraid of their children. Does it still start at home, the educational process?
Oh, it absolutely starts at home. Absolutely starts at home. I've addressed this formally, Freddie. I have a book series. It's called Baby King Jamar, spelled Jumar. Widely available on Amazon. 2 good ones to start with. They're about $12. It's a great start. Baby King Jamar Learns to Invest is one title, and another title is Baby King Jamar Plays the Budget Game. So I've been addressing them. I will continue to address them, and I think it will be a good idea for our audience to take a look at those.
Mr. Jukes, do you start financial literacy do you think it starts with the children around the dinner table?
Oh yeah, for sure. I believe that's the foundation. If we can establish these habits and healthy habits and practices as early as possible, it leads to that long-term success, and it allows them to get that advantage that we normally start from behind with.
All right. So as we're referencing the more traditional understanding, can our community take Black tax and replace the stigma to Black credit? Why do we feel tax to help our community, Dr. Thompson?
Well, I think when we look at the term black tax, of course, the word tax itself has negative connotations.
Yeah, I just paid mine.
And so I think it brings probably an authentic start at what you're looking at, what it represents. And so I wouldn't necessarily change the name, but I would use it as a platform for learning and developing some themes on where do we go from here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I would look at it. I mean, because it's going to be, we were just talking about how important for us to impress upon and teach our children in the home. I think we're at a period of time that's more important than ever. If we look that 40 states have banned critical race theory and have or elements of U.S. history, and those elements are African American elements. And so that means our children that we send to public schools in many of these states are not going to get as much historical information that we previously had, at least potentially. So it is going to be important that we understand we do need to spend time and teach our kids and present books to them, and also make them realize that our history didn't start at 1619. we have a rich history that precedes that. And that's important also.
Well said. I want to go back to Latrina. It's interesting that we're talking about education, and that's really permeating our conversation this evening. And I just asked a question about, how do we go about educating our younger people about this? And it seems as if there's a stress on our community to help the younger people. And it's, well, how can I help the whole community? How do we reach the entire community? And what can we do as individuals? You're an entrepreneur. What have you found that works?
I do a lot of giving back, right? Giving back to the community, but we have to speak. We have to go on platforms, let our voices be heard. I do a lot of that, going out and standing up and speaking up for our rights and the things that we need. So it's allowing your voice to be heard and getting out and speak up for what you want. We've been left behind too long, and it's just time to speak up. We speak up for everything else. So we need to speak up for the things that are important and what we need for our families and our households. It's just time for that, in my opinion. And these settings gives us the opportunity to speak up and take this back home. And then we got to start telling people and pulling them in and letting them know. Unfortunately, a lot of people just are not educated in this area. So we have to continue to do the work and spread the word. That's what I've been doing. And I've seen small changes in the community, very, very small. But I know that if we keep going and keep doing this, we'll get there.
Is having the hard conversations with people, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We're just about out of time, and I want to go around the room one more time for each one of our panelists to have a word. And again, thank you to Latrina, Joshua Franklin, James Holmes Jr., Shakur Jukes, and Dr. James Thompson for being with us this evening. And of course, the Association for Black Economic Power. This is one way that we take the power back. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is there a need for other cultures to step up and acknowledge, as we are this evening, the tax? And if so, what's the difference in being woke? Latrina, you can start it off and we'll go around the room.
It's a good question. Could you repeat the question one more time? Because that was a good one.
So do we need to bring other cultures along in helping to step up and acknowledge this Black tax? And if so, what's the difference in being woke?
Well, I don't know if I agree with necessarily bringing them along, but as they are along our journey, we can keep making them aware. But I think this is for us to do. We are the ones that have been left behind for so long. I don't see a lot of other cultures in our predicament that's been left behind as long as we've, and what what we've been through. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I would say it's for us. What's for us is for us. But I'm okay with everyone else. And as I go, I'll show you and tell you and educate you about who I am with my presence and what I do, so. And the question was so good. It just.
Joshua Franklin, Take 30 seconds and share your response to the question.
Absolutely. I in part agree that it is not this is our fight individually and particularly. So particularly what I mean by that is that we have to kind of take that secret society standpoint and start to look at each other and help them in the same way that we help our children and we help our families inside of internal closed doors and private settings, rather than impressing upon others to understand our plight. But instead, that is very important. Let me be very clear. However, the work to be done must be done entirely by our community and be influenced by our community as well.
James Holmes Jr., what do you say?
One of the criticisms that African Americans have received for numerous years is, why do other ethnic groups come into the United States and seemingly start to do better economically than African Americans? Well, one of the reasons is that we have to start practicing group economics much better. They come into this country, they're already united, they're already practicing group economics. It started with slavery as far as dividing us all up. So we got to come together on that end. We have enough resources. We spend $1.5 trillion each year. So we're going to have to invest in each other. We welcome allies, that's great. But when it's all said and done, we're going to have to help ourselves.
All right. I'm going to defer, and I'm calling an audible here, Deborah Hurston, because I'd love for you to introduce something brand new in the closing minute or two that we have left. Our Black History Moment Matters. Tell us where it came from and set us up for the video that we're about to see.
Oh, thank you so much. I wish I could say it came from me, but it actually came from my staff person, one of my Wonder Women, and her name is Ladina Posey. She did the research, came up with this particular subject matter, and we decided that with these programs, we wanted to introduce some important moments in Black history. So for each of these programs, you will see Black History Moment Matters. And so with that, I think we're ready to punch that up.
The Association for Black Economic Power is pleased to bring you this Black History Matters moment. Knowing our past can be a vital link to the success of generations to come.
Inventor, carpenter, and master mechanic, Henry Boyd was born in Kentucky in 1802. Although his father was a white man, Boyd was also the son of an enslaved Black woman, which meant that he was born in slavery as well. Historians suggest because of his parentage, he was given an opportunity to learn a trade. He was an apprentice to a carpenter, and he worked long and hard enough to earn money to buy his freedom. In 1826, Boyd traveled to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he eventually, with the help of journeyman carpenters, became a house carpenter himself. One day, while a white carpenter showed up for work, too intoxicated to be effective, Boyd took the opportunity to show the owner his skills. He designed and built the first ever storekeeper countertop. This design still exists today. This impressed the storekeeper so much that he contracted Boyd for further construction projects. Within 8 years of arriving in his new city, Boyd had built his own business, which included building houses, and he employed several men, both Black and white. In addition to securing the permanent residence of his family, he also earned enough to purchase the freedom of his two siblings.
If you would like to learn more Black History Matters moments, go to our website at www.abepmpls.org.
And on behalf of the Association for Black Empowerment, I'd like to thank everybody who tuned in tonight for yet another amazing show. And we want to say thank you to the entire team, Deborah, Ladina, and Aida. And join us again monthly for these important conversations like this one. We learned something tonight about Black tax. And next month, we present the real economic cost of crime. I'm Freddie Bell, and for everyone who's been a part of this one, have a great evening, and we'll see you again next month. Good night, everybody.